Greetings and welcome to GDS 89. By now, you should have received the syllabus from email, or you have seen the announcement in Canvas where you could download the syllabus. If you haven't done so already, I'd recommend that you print the syllabus so that while we review the syllabus together, if you need to, you can make notes on the hard copy of the syllabus. It's really important that you print and you read the syllabus so that you have an understanding of what we're planning to do this semester. Again, this is GDS 89 JavaScript 1, and this is an introduction to JavaScript primarily from the perspective of the web designer and developer. My name is Curtis Pembroke, and I'll be your instructor for the course. I've been teaching at Mission College for 21 years as of this semester, and it's hard to believe because time has flown by. I started at Mission College as a faculty instructional designer, and back in 2000, we only had 5 online courses, and I served as instructional designer until 2011 and transferred to teaching 100% in the classroom. And my background is I have an undergrad degree in engineering, aeronautics, and I have a master's degree in instructional design, which is basically like um, an, an, an amalgamation of both educational psychology and technology based um, learning and technology. For example, when I was in graduate school, I was one of the first developers to use Dreamweaver. And in those days, we were using Dreamweaver to produce very rudimentary e-learning, and then of course other tools evolved as time progressed, and I spend a lot of my time in the summers producing e-learning for various companies, so I have to use my web design skills and my JavaScript programming skills. I fell into programming because, again, in graduate school, we were using Flash MX, which is what it was called because it was owned by a company called Macromedia. And I also learned an old application called Macromedia Director. And the scripting language for both Flash and Director was based on JavaScript. And so in those days, we pretty much taught ourselves the scripting code and coding for those two platforms. And then later I went on to study JavaScript a little bit um, in various courses and through various workshops. And it was primarily, again, for working with Flash. So I found myself here teaching JavaScript about 9 years ago. And that's pretty much me. If you want to learn more about me, you can check it out in the course. My email is a standard district email, curtis.pembroke at wvm.edu or curtis.pembroke at missioncollege.edu. My office is in Gilmore Center 217B. I will be on campus again this semester, but primarily in the evenings on Mondays and Wednesdays because I teach face to face on Monday and Wednesday evenings. And on Fridays, if you want to reach me by arrangement, we can arrange a Zoom. I'm not available for um, the entire 2 hours on Friday, but that's a general time frame. But you have to reach out to me in advance. We're here from January 29th through May 27th. It's hard to believe January is already almost gone. You know, it's really important since you've accessed Canvas and you've downloaded and printed the syllabus. It's really important that you complete all the items in the orientation folder, like the survey and the quiz, and that you do so by 212, because if you don't, you will be dropped. And it's because between 212 and 213, I have to report official enrollment in the course. And if you're not active in the course, and if you haven't completed the quiz and the survey and posted to the forum, then I will assume that you're not fully enrolled in the course and I'll have to drop you. After 212, if you decide, to or 213, if you decide to go missing in action or anything for any reason, um, then you're required to drop from the course. And if you don't drop, I will not drop you from the course. Some instructors will, after the last day to drop without a W, but you'll have to drop yourself. And so if you don't, that's probably the only way to get an F in my courses. And I'll talk about my grading philosophy shortly. I'm not going to make all of this reading by Curtis because I'd like you to read the syllabus on your own. I have a list of important dates which pertain to the college. It's always helpful for students. I want to talk briefly about the course. This course is an introduction to using JavaScript to develop applications for the web. And you're going to learn to develop interactive web pages or add interactivity to web pages using JavaScript. And you're going to learn the basics of JavaScript. Things like understanding how to create and declare variables, to create arrays and then assign values to the array, and working with objects, both built-in objects in JavaScript and objects in the DOM, the document object model, where we're actually going to access the web page and manipulate content on the web page. That's where all the action is in JavaScript. You'll learn a little bit about debugging, just enough to help you to get out of trouble. And some of the intermediate topics that we'll cover are web forms, events, and working with events, such as a mouse click, working with timers, etc., and using and scripting dynamic content, as well as using cookies and web storage to store content on the user's computer. We will receive an introduction to Ajax and JavaScript libraries. And we have a follow-up course that we'll be offering, hopefully, in the coming fall semester, which will cover more advanced topics in JavaScript, like Model View Controller, MVC, Angular, etc. And, JavaScript is like any language. It's really difficult to learn in the beginning, especially if you're a beginner. But once you learn the basic syntax, then things start to move along quickly. But just like any language, if you don't practice, if you don't practice speaking or writing that language, then you lose your proficiency. That's one of the difficulties for me as an instructor, because the only time I can apply my programming skills is in the summer when I have a contract here or there developing e-learning, and I just pray to get a contract where I can do and build some simulations or interactive games where I can use JavaScript. And so it's important that you use it. Use it. You're not going to walk away from this course being able to create the next world-changing app like Facebook or something, or Instagram or TikTok. You're going to know enough about the JavaScript language to get started. And then what you're going to find is JavaScript has so many applications now, both front end and back end, that you might just move into your niche, like using JavaScript to create games, or using JavaScript for front end development, or using JavaScript for other purposes that may not necessarily involve the web or occur server side, like with Node.js. And so, if you keep practicing the language and continue to take courses or look at content on the web, then you'll continue to expand your horizons. But this course will give you enough to get started. And when you're done, you'll be able to add some interactivity to web pages, create dynamic content, rollovers. You'll understand how to create slideshows and dynamic windows and sliders and modals, etc. There's no prerequisites for the course. However, this advisory is extremely important because this gets us into trouble. Every semester we get about a mix of CIS students, computer information students, and graphic design students. And you each have completely different demographics, and you approach programming completely different from one another. And but the one thing that's really important that you both bring to the class is you should have some knowledge of HTML and CSS. Just a little bit. So you need to understand, you know, basic HTML markup, the difference between a block and an inline element, working with divs and classes and identifiers, and understanding CSS rules, and what those look like. And if you can learn that in GDS 045 or on your own. HTML is probably one of the easiest languages to learn. And I'll give you some references so that you can bone up on your HTML. But one of the first things we will do is we'll review HTML so that I get a picture of where each of you are, so that as we move along, I have to take that into account as I'm doing the grading. And eventually, everyone who is a little behind, hasn't had a programming class, or doesn't know a language, or hasn't taken GDS 45, about a quarter of the way through the semester, a little bit, maybe a third, you start to kind of converge where you're all on equal footing. Students who have taken any other object-oriented programming languages, like C and C++, um, and C Sharp, in the beginning, or Python. In the beginning of the class, you're really going to feel like things are moving slow because most languages have the same structures, and we'll talk about structures as we progress through the first few weeks. And so, um, those of you with programming experience, I'm going to rely on you to be there to be a resource for some of the folks that are new. Now, we do have a textbook that's required in the course, and it's Murox JavaScript and jQuery. It's a really good book. They throw quite a bit at you, but in a very structured manner, and it really helps to scaffold the learner and the future programmer skills well, so that they can make that transition. For students with no prior HTML experience, um, you might consider getting a second resource for reference, and that's JavaScript for Kids, and it's a playful introduction to programming. And that's really for if you have absolutely no programming experience. This book, if you read the early chapters, like the first 5 chapters, it kind of primes you in a very delicate way so that you better understand what you're seeing in Murox. But I'll bring you along. It's really important. This book is for adults too. In fact, I've read reviews where they said it's a little too much for kids, which surprised me because most of Gen Z most of the Gen Z learners that I know, and I use my kids as an example. I have a 15-year-old, almost 16. They pick up very quickly on programming. Um, I also recommend other references. The JavaScript Absolute Beginner's Guide is a nice little read if you want to continue to have additional resources or sources, or you can go to Kipra's website, and I've given you the link here. A great book, but is a little dated, is JavaScript and jQuery and front-end development. In fact, if Druckett ever updates his book and produces a second edition, then it will be my primary textbook again. Um, our textbook, of course, is going to cost you about $40 or so, and I think that's a small investment compared to other textbooks. It'll be worth it because it helps you learn JavaScript quite a bit. But you do have access to these first two books, JavaScript for Kids and JavaScript and jQuery, for free through O'Reilly. And if you go to this URL, it will explain how to register for O'Reilly and get free access to their ebooks. And they're not EPUB or Moby books. They actually are displayed in the O'Reilly Player, which works very well if you download the O'Reilly app for your tablet or your phone. In terms of assignments, pretty straightforward. You have to complete the orientation, which includes taking the orientation quiz, watching this video, which I track, completing the student survey, and then posting an introduction to the discussion forum. When you do all three of these things, you're done. We have 10 lab exercises worth 20 points, and I recommend a variety of reading, and I also have videos that you can watch, and depending on how we progress in the class, I'll record additional videos, and then participating in lab discussions. And the way that works is, what I recommend is, if you have a question, like let's say that you are working on a lab and something's wrong and it throws an error and you need help debugging, I would recommend that you post your code in the discussion forum and have your peers debug it, or I will debug it to assist you. And I don't consider that cheating. I consider that collaborative learning. Some of you will bring a lot of experience to the course, probably even more than I have. It happens every semester. And so it helps to have someone help you. And I will chime in, and other students are welcome to chime in. Students tend to have the same questions, and there are no stupid questions. And then, of course, we have the final exam, which is not a comprehensive exam. In other words, it's not full of true, false, multiple choice questions that cover all the chapters and everything that we do this semester. It's basically project based. So I'll give you some parameters and some content like graphics, etc. And I'll say build something similar to what I'm showing you. Or you can create something, and extend it as long as it's along the same lines. For example, working with objects and creating objects and classes. In terms of grading, my grading is very straightforward. This is the grading criteria. I can tell you right now, you already have an A in my class, and so it's yours to lose, basically. And I don't know how that sounds, but basically, I my philosophy on grading is I actually hate grading. I don't like the idea of grading, because particularly with something like JavaScript, because it's already stressful enough to learn a language, and then having to know that, oh, I'm trying to fight for this grade, really, really adds more stress and can make it difficult. And so when I do grading, I look at effort and not perfection. And so, in other words, if I can see in your code that you you apply what you've learned, that there's some decent structure, that you add comments and you explain what the different code blocks are doing, even if it throws like a million errors, um, I'll do my best to correct it, or you can post to the forum and your peers can correct you before you submit it. But if you put in the effort, what you're going to find is I'm going to give you full credit, but I'll give you lots of feedback. But on the converse, if you just completely blow off the assignment and you just don't put in the effort, and that's obvious, like you either hack someone else's code, and I can tell, or if you don't document and comment, or just in general, it's really hard if you to put yourself in that position with me, because if you try and I see that effort, you're going to get credit for the assignment. So the key is just to do the work, and you'll pass the class. The schedule is very straightforward. It's broken down by each week and what we're covering in the week. There's one caveat: everything is subject to change, because the classes what I find is the demographics, especially in this class, changes a lot every semester. And so what I try to do is keep us all moving as one herd, if you will, and on schedule. But there are times where we might get bogged down, where we have to spend maybe an additional week on a topic like DOM scripting or links, images, and timers. This is a big one, and it gets kind of sometimes a little bit thorny, and so we might spend an extra week. And then what I will do is I'll move, jQuery around, and I make accommodations. Like I might throw it into jQuery plugins because here this is sort of a survey and not so much that you're going to learn it and be proficient, because you get this in other classes like GDS 046. And so in general, we'll be on this schedule roughly within a 2 week period. The rest of the syllabus you can read yourself. I think I emphasize here that you're required to participate in online discussions and activities to receive points. So if you don't have any questions, then you might consider posting something relevant to what we're discussing that week. Like, oh, I found this really great website that shows some tricks on using JavaScript, to create an interactive game using, timers and it's for example, and you can share that. But generally, there's enough discussion about just what we're working on so that everyone collaborates. The last class, it was um, very very interactive. Lots of students talking and helping one another through the assignments. The rest of this you can read on your own. It's some obligatory stuff that the college requires me to put in my syllabi. Every instructor, might notice, has it in theirs. And if you have any questions, here's the last thing I want to point out. If you have questions, in addition to the forums where you can post your code, and every week I have what I call the questions forum. And so if it's related to a topic that we're covering or an assignment, you're going to put it in that module's questions area. But if it's a topic where you have a question, maybe about the future, like and you know, like what can I have more information on the final exam, for example, then you can post that in the instructor questions forum. Just make sure that you post your questions in the forums, because students tend to have the same questions. And if you don't post it in the forum, let's say you send it to me in email, I answer that same question like 20 times. And so I'd rather simulate what's happening in the traditional classroom online. So if you post to the forum, it's almost like you're raising your hand, and then I have to answer or your peers answer, and we get kind of the same interactivity that we see in a traditional classroom. If you have questions of a personal nature, like maybe you need an extension on an assignment, then that's when you'll email me. But here's the thing, I automatically give you a 48-hour extension on all assignments, and you don't have to email me until after you're 2 days late. And even then, I will grant assignments up to 5 days after the due date, depending on the circumstances. And you just need to notify me via email. So that's something you'd put in email. Okay, well, it went a little longer than I expected. Well, if you have any questions, post your questions to the questions forum. And thanks for taking the class.